Greetings from the Tech Cave. Fenris here, and today I have here a rather nasty looking Super Nintendo, but hey, at least there's a note on it that says what's wrong with it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, wait a minute, didn't you already do a video on this subject? And to that I say, yes and no. Let me explain. So, technically, the last Fenris Fixes video that I did was on the Super Famicom, but realistically speaking, there's not that many differences between a Super Nintendo and a Super Famicom internally wise. So some of the differences include the controller ports, the RF modulator, which is tuned for channels 3 and 4 for the North American Super Nintendo, whereas the Japanese RF modulator is tuned for Japan's channels 1 and 2. And the back panel is different, or more specifically, the DC barrel jack. If we were to take a look at the DC barrel jack of a Super Famicom, it's just a standard DC barrel jack. Whereas for the Super Nintendo, it uses a kind of laptop style barrel jack where you have the outer ring and then you have a center post. And as you can see with this one, not only is it yellowed, but it's also broken off, which is a really common problem with these Super Nintendos. Unfortunately, people can be a little aggressive with this back port, and as a result, the center post tends to snap off, but that's why they make replacement back panels. Now, I have not tested this system yet, unlike the Super Famicom, and the main reason why is I got this Super Nintendo from a lot of other Super Nintendos that were in even worse shape, and they were all kinds of levels of disgusting internally and externally. So I'm not even going to bother testing this thing until we give it a nice deep clean. Now, last time when I did the Super Famicom, I focused less on the cleaning aspect and more on the electronic side of things. Well, for this video, I want to do the opposite. I want to focus more on the cleaning process of things, and if I find any sort of faults with the hardware, I will focus on that as well, but we're going to be spending a little less, hopefully, on the electronic side of things and more on the cleaning side of things. So, without further ado, let's get it open. Alright, now let's just lift the lid very gently and... Ugh. Yeah, this is about what I expected. We got here, this looks like an SHVC CPU01. Actually, it's pretty obvious because it's the only one with an external sound module. But, yeah, you can kind of see why I said let's focus more on the cleaning aspect of things, but, let's tear this down further. This is disgusting. Sorry, I had to pause for a moment because I really had to scrub my hands and get some gloves on because, ugh, this is so disgusting. Look at that. There's a dead roach on there. Oh my god. Let's take a look underneath. See what chip provision is that. Is that a dead fire ant? God, this is so gross! This looks like a 111 revision, so that's great. It is a launch model, but it is just so nasty. Oh my god. Ugh. Yeah, this is why we're focusing on the cleaning aspect of it, because this is just foul. And I'm not even done tearing it down yet. I still gotta break down the top shell, but might as well just get the front panel off too. Come on. There we go. Yeah, I just gotta keep going. This is foul AF, but you know what? I gotta keep going. Sorry about that. Looks like my camera kind of stopped on me while I was in the middle of disassembling the sound module. But you know what? I don't necessarily blame it. But yeah, as you can see, this thing is absolutely disgusting. Even like, I have all the shell parts here. Like, this is just absolutely nasty. So this is definitely going to need a deep cleaning before I even attempt to look at it. Not just the shell, the board as well. So let me show you how I do that. Actually, before we begin that step, I just remembered this, but we have to make sure that the system is discharged before we even start deep cleaning. So we just simply plug in the switch. And yes, it is discharged. So that's good. So let's get back to cleaning this thing. Okay, sorry for the shaky cam and echoey audio. We're kind of in my bathroom right now, and more specifically, we're in front of my bathroom sink. Now, under normal circumstances, I would clean these boards with like isopropyl and just hit it with a toothbrush, but because of the condition that it's in, it's so gross that like, I don't even want to touch it with that stuff. I don't think isopropyl is going to cut through all this. So instead, I'm going to hit it with some degreaser / OxyClean. Well, this is off-brand stuff, but you get what I mean. So I'm just going to, really spray on. This is why we had to make sure the board was discharged before we started with this. Because this could probably short something if we aren't careful. I'm gonna hit the sound module and the power ports with this. And we don't want this to sit too long. Probably like maybe 20, 30 minutes at tops. I almost want to leave it for an hour, but I don't want to accidentally erode something. I don't think this stuff is caustic enough to do that, but you know, you can't be too safe, right? Actually, I think this is good enough. So yeah, I'm just gonna let this stuff, let me hit it a little more. The board especially got it the worst. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave that there for a good 20 minutes while I get the shell parts in the kitchen sink. So now we're in front of my kitchen sink, and before you ask, yes, I am gonna make sure to deep scrub the shit out of these sinks after I'm done with this process. In fact, I'm gonna be deep scrubbing the shit out of both my bathroom sink and the kitchen sink. But aside from that, what I'm gonna be doing is just flooding all of this shell parts with hot water and OxyClean with soap. Now, if there's a running theme with the cleaners I use, it's mostly OxyClean because that eats away a lot of the dirt and grime that you find with these systems. So let me just really splooge all that on. Wait for the hot water to kick on. And just start splashing it. Alright, so now I'm just going to leave this in this hot soapy bath for a good 30 minutes. Okay, so a good 15 to 20 minutes had already passed, and I can already see that the OxyClean and degreaser combo has already started working its magic. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to start brushing away, and as you can already see, it's already getting that crap off. But yeah, I'm basically going to just be scrubbing it down with this brush, most of it off camera, mainly because unfortunately after my last video that I recorded, the tripod broke. So until I get a new tripod, it's going to be a bit difficult for me to do something like scrub it down with one hand while recording with the other. So I'm just going to scrub this thing down and you'll get to see the final result. Okay, so after a lot of scrubbing, you can see these boards are looking a lot better than they were before. And while I was at it, I went ahead and sprayed down my sink and scrubbed it down as well. But for the final piece, because I don't want there to be excess water in these boards, I'm just going to splash it with some 91% isopropyl. Make sure you get everywhere with this. Yeah. So I'm going to be splashing all these parts with isopropyl, and then I'm going to be leaving them to dry overnight. And with that, that's all the electronics parts deep scrubbed and sprayed down with isopropyl. And I actually forgot to explain in the last clip what the purpose of spraying it down with isopropyl is. Isopropyl will naturally repel out water, so it'll allow these to dry faster, as well as ensure that, you know, we don't accidentally give these boards a bit of water damage. So yeah, these are going to be left to dry overnight, and in the meantime, I'm going to go over and check on the shell. Okay, so I just got the rest of the shell parts done, and I'm sorry for not filming that part of the process, but it's largely the same to how I scrubbed up the circuit board parts. The only difference is that it is under nice hot soapy water. But yeah, as you can see, it's not perfect, but it's certainly a lot better than where we started. And as you can also see, the yellowing didn't go all the way through like it does with most launch model Super Nintendos. Meaning, when we retrobright the shell, it should come out with much better results. But yeah, we got the shell all cleaned up, and I am going to try to hit some of the finer details here. These look like just regular ink markings, so I might be able to get it off with some Rain-X. I will definitely give it a try, but we need to get these shells as clean as possible before we put them in the Retrobright box. But other than that, yeah, the only other thing I can say is that I also got all the metal stuff here sprayed down with isopropyl, including the cartridge slot, which I didn't even notice that was in with the rest of the shell parts. But, you know, I got all that sprayed down as well. So, yeah, I'm just going to leave all these parts here overnight, and once they all dry, we can proceed on to the next step. Alright, so back over here with the towel setup, and we're going to be going over the process of prepping the shell for retrobrighting. So first of all, we're going to need to separate the two shell pieces, and really for retrobrighting, other than the UV box itself, you're going to need a couple things. First of all, you're going to need some large gallon bags. Now, you don't need like bags this large, which let me just show you what one of them looks like. But, you know, this pack of 6 was like $1.25, so I'm not going to complain. And plus, it will fit the shell pieces as needed. But more importantly, what we're going to need is a hydrogen peroxide solution. And I have here a bottle of Superstar 50 volume peroxide cream. Now, I know people have an issue with the peroxide cream, mainly because of things like streaking and whatnot, but from experience, I find that the streaking only occurs when you either apply too much or you let the shell sit too long in the UV bath, or UV box in this case. So, how I solve the too much cream issue is, what I'll do is open the bag, pour a little bit of cream, that should be enough, into the bag. Oh, and also make sure you wear gloves for this. This stuff is really caustic to the skin and it will burn. But generally speaking, I make sure to spread evenly, or as evenly as I can, throughout the section of the bag in which the console is going to be in. Sorry, it's a little bit difficult to do this. I'm having to use my legs as like a pseudo tripod. And that should be good enough since it's only on the top layer. But now we're just going to open it up. We're going to put the shell in upside down so that way we can encourage the cream to spread downward. Make sure you have as airtight of a seal as possible. And you just want to start massaging the rest of the cream onto the shell. All right. And with that, now the first half of our shell is done. So I'm just going to repeat the process with the bottom half, and then we're going to stick it in the UV box. So give me a moment. All right, so as you can see, I have the top and bottom shell inside the UV box. And if you're curious about the build, it's literally just a plastic bin with some UV LED strips and some aluminum tape for reflection. Now, the one thing I did not add to this build is a heating element, and there's a couple reasons why I didn't do that. One, I didn't add a heating element because it's not really required. You just need UV lights. The only purpose of a heating element is to accelerate the process. The other reason is because I'm using hydrogen peroxide cream, it reduces the risk of splotching, which I've noticed happen a lot with the peroxide cream method, is that when heat is involved, that's when splotching is more likely to occur. And another thing that I must emphasize, do not, and I repeat, do not exceed 48 hours total when doing this process. If you exceed 48 hours, you run the risk of not only splotching, but also sun bleaching the shell. So you make the shell too white, and this is not confirmed, but I think it also makes it a little more fragile as a result as well. So just be mindful when building your own retro box, and be mindful when doing this whole retrobrighting process. So in any case, I'm just gonna, gotta plug it in. See it glow. Bing. And we're just gonna close it up and leave it for 28 hours at the start. Check up on it, and if it needs an additional 24 hours, we'll leave it for an additional 24 hours. Okay, so while the shell is busy in the UV box, we could take a look at the main motherboard. Now, as you can see, this board is in desperate need of a recap. The 100 microfarad capacitors for composite and Luma are vented. The two 33 microfarads along the DC line are vented. The rest of the caps look fine, but if we're going to be replacing these 6, we might as well replace them all. But in addition to that, I'm going to be removing all the through-hole parts on this board. And the reason why I am doing that is because A, I need to check for traces, and B, it is possible for there to still be some gunk hidden underneath those parts. So I want to make sure that this board is thoroughly cleaned out, so I need to remove everything. So without further delay, let's begin. Okay, so I got most of the through-hole parts removed, and all that's left is the multi-out and the reset switch. So let's get on that. Okay, so with all the through-hole parts removed, we can now do a closer visual inspection of the board. So, looking over the board, there are some really corroded vias, as well as some really eaten away traces. So this is why I wanted to remove all the through-hole parts. Because of the condition that we got this board in, I suspected that there was either going to be something underneath the board, which fortunately there isn't. Well, the reset switch has some gunk underneath it, but that's fine. But I can also see, and this is reason number 2, that there are a few traces that are eaten away, in addition to some vias, like this one that leads to pin 55, 56, 57. The camera might not pick this up, but there's an eroded trace for pin 33. Pin 32 looks a little eaten away. There's some discoloration here, though that might be fine, though. I will check. And even looking at the sound section, pin 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17 looks eaten away. And I just noticed this too, but this trace right here looks eaten away. So yeah, we're going to be poking around with a multimeter just to make sure that all these traces are good. So let me just bust out the multimeter, start probing around, and see what I find. Okay, so I just got done poking all these vias and traces with a multimeter, and they all checked out good, so that's great. So we can just move on to the next step, which is going to be removing all these surface mount caps. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on how I remove the surface mount caps. I already covered that in the Super Famicom restoration video, but it's basically the same process. We add some flux, we run over it with our Hot Air Rework Station, and pop out each of the caps. So we're just going to skip ahead to when I have all these caps removed, and we're going to be checking the traces underneath. Okay, so I have all the capacitors removed, and I also went ahead and scrubbed down the board with some isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush. But more importantly, there was something I found interesting. So if you take a look at C58 and C57, these are the two capacitors that are related to composite video. And if we were to take our multimeter, we can see that these two negative pads are connected. However, if we go from here to here, we get no connection at all. And you may also notice that there's a component leg sticking out, and I will explain as to why that is. This whole trace here is eaten away at certain spots. In fact, let me get a little closer. You can see how the metal is just completely eaten away. And this is why it is important to recap these Super Famicoms or Super Nintendos. Unfortunately, they have reached an age where these SMD caps are starting to vent and they're starting to eat away at the board. And as a result, you end up having to do patchwork like this, where I had to take a component leg, poke it through the via, and connect it to R33 where it leads to on the other side. So now, once I get my new capacitor in, I'm going to have to bend this component leg down and anchor it onto the negative leg here, just to make sure that it is getting a solid and efficient connection. So keep that in mind. If you don't change out your capacitors sooner, if it hasn't already been serviced yet, you can end up having to do patchwork like this simply because you waited too long. But with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and remove the excess solder on all these cap pads and recap the whole system. So be back in a moment. Okay, so it looks like I found another break in the circuit, and I really should have noticed it when I was talking about how the composite trace was broken, but also the Luma trace, which is C60 and 59 here, was also broken. Not only on the VIA side, but the two pads here were not even making a connection at all when they should be. So once again, not only did I have to run a jumper to R42, which is where the Luma trace connects to, but I also had to add another component leg so I can connect both of the negative terminals together. So I guess the lesson I can give here is always double, if not triple, check your work before you proceed further. You may end up finding that the work is a little bit more extensive than you initially thought. Okay, so I have all the capacitors installed as well as all the through-hole parts installed, and I was even able to dig out a better condition RF box, even though it's not really necessary, and I got the new backplate installed. Now, I'm sorry for not filming all that. I really needed to pay attention to this area right here just to make sure all the component legs were connected where they needed to be and there was no bridging. But like I said before, this is less a focus on the soldering side of things and more of a focus on the cleaning side of things, which we definitely got most, if not all, the cleaning done already. So all that's left now is we are going to take our heat spreader here, which has the 78SO5 installed already. We're going to install it and we're going to test to make sure that this board is fully working. So see you in a bit. Okay, so I have everything mostly put back together. I'm still waiting on the shell to finish up its time in the UV box, but you know what? We don't need the shell to test the board. So I got the controller board all hooked up, the sound module installed, which for the SHVC CPU01, if you don't have that on, it won't boot. And I got my 3 cable types there, composite, SV, and RGB. So it's just a matter of plugging our test cart in, powering on, and looks like we got video now. So let's scroll over to the burn-in test, make sure it passed everything. And it does. So let's see if it passed all the visual tests. Uh-oh. Looks like we got some issues with scaling. But otherwise it passed the initial test. So before we proceed on further, let's plug this back in because we also got to test the video signals. So let's plug in S-Video. We have S-Video. Scroll over to RGB. Switch over to RGB. And we got RGB. So all 3 of our video formats work, which is great, but let's see what's really going on. So just gonna grab my copy of Super Mario Kart, power it on. So far it looks fine, but what I'm waiting for is the demo screen that demonstrates like the Mode 7 stuff, because I'm curious as to what's really going on with this thing. Ooh. Yeah, we got some graphical glitching going on with the Mode 7 stuff. It looks like CPU functionality is fine because the game's able to think, but it's clear that there's something wrong with the Mode 7 aspect of it. So, just power this down for a moment. So, when it comes to Mode 7, it could be one of these two chips. It's either going to be a PPU issue or a CPU issue. Let me plug in another game. In fact, let's just unplug this. Let me see what happens when I plug in Super Donkey Kong. Yeah, it's blinking in and out for Super Donkey... Oh, wait. That's all messed up, too. Looks like the rest of the background assets are working fine, though. So, yeah. This could be one of two things. It could either be the CPU because it's not able to process the Mode 7 graphics correctly, or it's the PPU, meaning that it's not displaying those graphics correctly at all. So what I'm going to do is off camera, I'm going to swap out the PPU, see if there's any changes, but if not, then we're going to have to swap out the CPU. Alright, so as you can see, I have the old PPU out, and I have a new PPU installed. So let's just fire this up. Okay, we still get an image. Scroll down to the burn-in test. Alright. Passing, passing, passing. And we're just going to let it run through the screens. Okay, that's looking good. And it passes all the scaling tests. But just to double check, let's pop in some Super Mario Kart. And it passed the Mode 7 effect for Super Mario Kart. Alright, next is Super Donkey Kong, just to make sure it still passes CIC check. And seems to do so. Oh, and also, as you saw, the title screen was now looking good. Or rather, the Nintendo Presents screen. Alright, next is my unfinished repro Star Fox 2. Yep, that's working good. And last but certainly not least, just pop in a random game. Kamen Rider. So yeah, this unit is now fully working. All that was wrong with it was a bad PPU. So that's great. That means that in terms of like all the circuit board stuff, we are completely done. So now I'm just waiting on the shell pieces to finish in the UV box, and we can get this thing fully assembled. Alright, so after a couple days in the UV box, the shell, as well as all the shell pieces, are finished. Now, as you can see, it certainly looks a lot better than when we started, but it's not perfect. And the unfortunate reality of Retrobrighting is that you can never restore the shell back to pure perfection unless it's only like slightly yellow. I mean, even the controller port right here is still pretty yellow, but you know, it's certainly a lot better. And I may actually revisit this shell later on in the future. Maybe I might, I don't know, patch up the corners here since these were pretty damaged and give it like a nice gold paint job. But that's plans for the future and not for now. For now, what we're going to do is put this system back together and get some final shots in. Alright, and with that, the Super Nintendo is fully reassembled. Now, it's not perfect, but it's certainly a lot better than where we started. And as well, this unit now fully works. We got the back panel replaced, we got the PPU-1 replaced, and we got a full recap on this system, as well as the composite and Luma traces patched up. And even though I didn't get this on camera, I also did do the VCC rail fix, as well as the stereo balance fix. Now, I do apologize for not focusing too much on the soldering aspect of things. That was the core focus of the Super Famicom restoration video. So naturally, for the Super Nintendo restoration video, I want to focus more on the cleaning aspect of it, since that was not the core focus of the Super Famicom restoration video. Now, that being said, this may not be the last time we see this unit. Oh no. I might end up spray painting it, I might end up replacing the shell. I don't know exactly, but you know, we shall see what we do with this unit. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and thank you all so much for being patient with me. I have more content coming along the way, and yeah, with that being said, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.